Here now to weigh in is Dan Henninger, Wall Street Journal columnist and a Fox Business contributor. Dan, always great to see you. If there is one thing many of these candidates do not want on the campaign trail, it's their commander-in-chief stumping on their behalf. That has got to be about the worst sign for a Democratic candidate right now, isn't it?
Oh, I think so, Brian. That statement you put up is one of the worst things I've seen. I mean, this is the spokesman for Representative Tim Ryan, who's running for the Senate in Ohio. He is literally saying we don't want and have no plans to ask the President of the United States to come and campaign for us. But, you know, you look at it, the reasons are kind of interesting there, Brian. That's Ohio. The other state where this is happening is Arizona, where Democratic incumbent Mark Kelly is also pushing back against having Biden come into the state. And the reason is that, especially in Ohio, Donald Trump did very well in Ohio and Arizona. There are a lot of Trump-leaning voters in those states. And it would have been one thing if Joe Biden had come into office as he promised, as a peacemaker, as a president who was going to return to normalcy. He's been anything but that. He's been an antagonist to Donald Trump, an antagonist to the Republicans. And I think that the candidates in places like Ohio and Arizona who are competing hard for independent voters are afraid that if Joe Biden comes in there, he is simply going to push a lot of these voters toward their Republican opposition.
So you talk about the midterm. You've got Fox Power rankings showing Democrats of late gaining momentum in the race for control of the House. Republicans still projected to win in November, but apparently the margin seems to be shrinking. Dan, my question to you is, how much of these polls capture day-to-day movements in news that don't mean that much versus kind of the underlying core issues that really move how people actually vote? Okay, we lost. Yeah. Dan, you're back. Are you there? Did you hear the question?
Yeah, I think it's a tough time to be in midterm election. You've got Republicans trying to run out of office, and they are basically been in the opposition, which means they have a problem of self-definition in front of the voters. Voters ask, what do you stand for? And there's nothing really they've been able to offer since they've been in office other than to criticize the opposition. Recall back in 1996, House Minority Leader Newt Gingrich, about a month and a half before the election, offered the contract with America. It was a substantive list of policy proposals, and the Republicans won big back then. I'm not exactly suggesting we need another contract with America, but one has to realize that as these races tighten and as inflation perhaps abates a little bit, it is going to become the responsibility of Republicans to start defining themselves and to explain to voters what they stand for, not merely what they're against.
Right. Dan, I want to dig into this a little bit. You've got your latest opinion piece talking about the Mar-a-Lago raid, and you said, when it comes to former President Trump's political future, and this is shocking, it should depend on voters' decisions, not endless federal investigations. But you know, that's what we've gotten. I mean, it is just a trickle, sometimes a steady stream of one piece of news around investigation after another. Is it possible, Dan? Is it really possible that at the end of the day, voters could actually decide this based on the merits and their understanding of what he could bring to that office?
Well, they could if this investigation were terminated, which I literally suggested that if the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, felt any sense of political leadership, now that he's got control of the classified documents, they raided Mar-a-Lago, they took them, they've got them, he should shut the investigation down. Instead, Brian, what we're seeing is a replay of the President Trump's first term, the Russian collusion narrative. No one quite knew what was going on. It always seemed that the president was being accused of something bad. That's what's happening here. And in the absence of any information, with this Mar-a-Lago investigation bogging down in the courts, as it clearly is, what we're going to see is a stream of leaks going forward, right, unsubstantiated, based on anonymous sources. And I think the effect on the American public is simply corrosive, as it was in the president's first term. And I think we're getting to the point where it would be much better to have a democratic solution to the question of Donald Trump's future than a legal solution. If people want Trump back in the race, then they should be able to decide that. If they think it's time for him to retire, they should be able to decide that too, rather than leaving it to Merrick Garland and the lawyers at the Justice Department to make this call.
I agree with you that it's so corrosive, the leaks, the insinuations, the foreboding sense that something bad has happened, but nobody can ever quite put their finger on it or prove it. Real quickly, Dan, when things get that corrosive, I mean, where do you think that leads? What ultimately happens when those kinds of things corrode people's faith in institutions like the FBI, DOJ, and others?
Well, it puts us on thin ice. I mean, the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice, these are major American institutions. We do need them. But when you've got half the population saying we no longer trust them, you've got a political system that really is sort of on the bubble with the American people. And that is a dangerous place to be, Brian. We don't want to be there.
Great piece, Dan Henninger. Great insight as always. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you.